Hello, everyone. This is Gene Quinn. Thank you for joining us here today. We have a fun and interesting conversation about innovation today and what we can learn from patent portfolios and the migration of technologies from location to location, from where they start to where they wind up. So thank you for joining us for this conversation today, wherever you are. And look forward to having a robust conversation. If you have any questions throughout the hour with us, you can send us your questions in the questions tab here on your GoToWebinar control panel. And right next to the questions tab is also a handouts tab. So if you click on the handouts tab, you can download this PowerPoint presentation. Now, everybody who registered for this webinar will get a copy of these slides together with a recording of the webinar. So you'll get that in your email, and please feel free to watch that and share that with others. I think you'll enjoy this webinar and want to do so. So please feel free to do that. So let me introduce our presenters today. I will be the moderator. I'll have more questions probably than answers. I find this topic really interesting. Joining us from PatentSite, we have William Mansfield, and he is the head of consulting and consumer success. And also joining us from PatentSite is Dirk Kaspari, and he's the senior consultant at PatentSite as well. Joining us as the color commentator is Mike McLean, and he's a technology and patent professional. And those of you who have been on webinars with us in the past know Mike has been with us in the past on many a webinar, and I'm glad to have him back. It's been a while, and I'm glad he was available to join us. It's always good to get Mike's take on these particular issues regarding innovation and particularly developing innovation and so forth. So here's the outline of what we hope to cover. And I don't really need to go too much in depth here, but what I would, let me just take one pause because I did skip over one thing. And this is sponsored by PatentSite, and PatentSite's a LexisNexis company. And PatentSite has been a great sponsor of ours for a long time, and so has LexisNexis. So what I'd appreciate it is if you find yourself in need or interested in the tool here that we're going to talk about that came up with the data that really is going to drive the conversation, please reach out to PatentSite and ask them for a demo. They'll give you a demo. The information and that is available in PatentSite, I am always amazed at what you can learn by looking into their information. And I think you will be too. And without sponsors, we can't bring this type of conversation to you. So please take the moment, if you need their services, to check them out. I think you'll find them quite useful. So gentlemen, I don't necessarily need to go through this outline. Everybody's kind of read this outline when they signed up for this webinar, so they know what we're going to talk about, what we're getting into here today. We're going to talk about lithium-ion batteries and LEDs and where they're developed and how they moved around from place to place and where they're being manufactured now, and then kind of pivot to see what other technologies are currently looking as if they're maybe going to migrate, and what we can learn from this migration by looking at patent data. It's a big, bold topic we're going to undertake here in the next hour. What I'd like to do is preliminarily get your thoughts on this topic. So let's go in order. William, let's start with you. What do you want people to have in mind as we approach this topic of the migration of IP, or maybe it's looking at patent portfolios more in general for competitive information? It's a big topic. What do you want them to think about?
I mean, Dirk can speak more to the details here. And I think it was a really fascinating idea when he came to me with this as well, because I know where I used to work in the solar industry, there was this huge turmoil in 2011 time as the Chinese mass production came on, and maybe the German innovators who really developed a lot of the technology kind of lost as the price of the product just bottomed out and dropped, massively. So this isn't just an abstract case that is there. In fact, for companies in industries in this kind of on the development cycle, those that are going somewhere from initial research to full scale mass production, not keeping aware of the development from country to country and firm to firm and the scaling of mass production can lead to basically your market being stripped away from you from one day to the next. So there's an element of interest here, but there's a huge forewarning of these can be you can be ahead of the curve or you can be behind the curve, and if we're behind the curve, we lose out, and if we are ahead of the curve here, we can take advantage of that situation.
Yeah. So Dirk, maybe we should go to you next since I introduced you second. What is it, I mean, that you want people to think about before we really dive into the slides and look at the facts and the figures?
So my view on this is that we have the opportunity to look at longer periods than our usual 20 years when we think of IP. So we can go back way more than 20 years. And it seems that the migration of IP is interwoven with globalization. And the question is going to be if history will repeat itself again or not. And I think this is very interesting to look at.
Yeah, and history tends to repeat itself over and over and over again. And Mike, I know you look at these things from an engineering perspective, from all different angles. And I have a lot of questions for you today, but giving you the floor, what is it that you want people, just in your own words, to think about or focus on first?
To me, what is the detail or the reality behind the big picture trends? How do you combine different data sources? The patent information is incredibly useful. What does that tell us about the market trends we're seeing? What does that tell us about where technology innovation is coming from? How do you combine that data and its insight with other sources of data to really truly understand what's happening and make the best decisions possible for your business?
Yeah. So one of the things that I would just have people think about as we move on, because one of the things I've written about a number of times in the past is that when you innovate in a place, whatever that place may be, and then you wind up having it developed in another location for scale and then manufactured in a different location, or maybe the same location where it was scaled, what you're doing is you're leaving for the secondary and then the third location a whole lot of potential IP for them to develop. Because one thing that we know for sure about engineering is it never quite scales the way that you thought it was going to. So there's always going to be additional follow-on innovations, and by some estimates, those follow-on innovations can be 75% or more of the overall innovation of whatever it was that you innovated in the first place. So if you're not doing the scaling work and you're not doing the manufacturing work, somebody else is getting an awful lot of innovation out of what you originally came up with. So looking at this migration of innovation and then the resulting IP that comes from it, I think is extremely telling. And I think a lot of times companies that think that they're outsourcing for a financial gain and benefit miss the big picture. So that would be the thing that I would encourage people to think about. And I'm going to have far more questions than answers from here on out. And William or Dirk, I'll let you drive the slides. I know you're going to take turns, and then Mike will bring you in for the color commentary here as the technical analyst. So William, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, first off, we'll look at LEDs and as an example, and like you say, move on to the lithium-ion batteries, and then look further to the future as well. So we just wanted to outline here, you know, if we look at the status today, what does it look like? And clearly, you know, China appears to be very much in the lead with the largest portfolio, more than double that of the next, Japan, and you know, many more than the others. So if we purely looked at the number of filings and active portfolio that exists today, I mean, it's pretty clear that China is in the lead. But I think most people know the kind of history of LED and the development that went into that, and the innovations that are even Nobel Prize winning came from a lot of other sources, right? So there was a lot of intense research to initially develop LEDs and then expand on that, and maybe Dirk or Mike can speak to that in a more expert way than I can, certainly. But the picture we see today seems very different from what we know about the history here, and I think we can see that a little bit more on the next slide, and maybe Dirk, you want to touch on some of that history and give us some points from the analysis.
Yes, if you just quickly, I know we can stick here with the countries on the right-hand side, the legend of the chart here. If you just think about it, if you try to recall which are the companies rolling out LEDs. So for me, it is from Japan, Toyota, Goza, Nishir. From the US, it is Cree. Then we had Germany, Osram, and we included it here just to show it was Philips out of the Netherlands. And if you see the numbers for the countries where these companies came from, it seems like Jean's comment earlier appears to be right, that someone is doing the groundbreaking work, and countries where you scale it, like for example, South Korea, Taiwan, and now the mass production China is taking over to a certain extent. Innovations out of from the fundamental fundamental developers or the early developers.
It's amazing that point you raise about the Netherlands as well, and Philips there, and even Russia being above this in this analysis today, which is a very strange situation to find yourself in based on the history, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So Mike, let me bring you in here too, and just when you look at something like this, because I know you look at things on a very granular level. You look at patents, you look at the technologies from an engineering perspective for clients. When you see this, what do you think? I mean, and I guess what I'm trying to dance around is how many of those Chinese portfolios do you think are something people probably need to worry about?
I think that Chinese number is inflated, right? If you look at just general Chinese patent filings, they're 46% of all global filings. So there's probably a normalization that needs to be done in terms of the real innovation that's happening within that number. But it's still going to be a large number, but likely more in line with what you see between Taiwan, South Korea, US, and Japan. I think it's more in line there. You've traditionally had the big five that Dirk mentioned, with really dominant IP positions in this LED space that have been really active asserting their portfolios in multiple jurisdictions, and most of the newer companies have taken licenses or had settlements with those. But a lot of those really fundamental patents are starting to get long in the tooth or expire. I believe Nichia's white LED patent, for example, which is really core for them, expired in 2017. So some of those fundamental assets that have really driven key royalty streams for some of those companies will be coming due. In terms of the China number as well, you need to look at the impact, and it'd be interesting to look at separating which of those patents are coming from Chinese companies and which are coming from some of the international leaders in this space with significant both manufacturing and design centers in China, because almost all of these companies have open large-scale operations, not just in manufacturing operations, but innovation centers, design centers, R&D centers, due to the I think just the number and volume of engineers that China does produce and provides access to.
Yeah, and I think that we see that on the next slide, right, William, where the LED
exactly, and that number, the date that you were speaking about there of 2017, something like that. I mean, we can already see some of the ending of that, right? So we can see back in the 80s and 90s, the birth of LEDs and the development further of the technology, the search for blue LEDs back years ago. We can see the massive innovation coming from particularly Japan. But then as it further developed more from the US and South Korea, and then today this explosion from China. And of course we're looking at filing dates here, or priority dates. So the last couple of columns here are a little bit extreme, right? That last whole blue column is maybe an extreme case, and once we have the information after the publication delay for those last couple of years, it may look very different, but we can still very much see the trend if we look back at 2016, 2017, that China is becoming the majority filer, at least in the space. And the old IP, I mean, this is why LED is such a strong example. It's been around long enough that we're coming to the point where those patents are expiring, and I mean, maybe that's part of what drives the scaling in China. I don't know if Dirk or Mike, you can speak to that at all, but I could imagine that's a factor there as well.
I would divide this chart into the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So the left-hand side speaks more to the 5 companies we had before. But if you think about it, when did you hear the first time about a regular LED light bulb, which you put into your lamp at home? This is more within the last 10 years than the 1980s until 2000s. So what I want to say is when we talk about Cree, Toyota, Gosei, Nishia, Osram, Philips, we are talking more probably towards this semiconductor piece of LED lighting. But then to get a light bulb, we need much more. We need this control circuit. Maybe you want to dim your lamp. There's innovation for that. Then you need different color temperatures or specialty lights. If you're in a museum, in retail, if you're at home, maybe you want to change that. So we are talking all of a sudden about the phosphors you need for LEDs. And on top of that, you want to have sometimes very bright light, and LEDs are sensitive to temperature. So heat management is also a big topic. So I would say that it is more these topics, but the semiconductor part, which we see as a development in the recent decade, and not the real semiconductor innovation we had before that.
I think that's a good point, Dirk. And what you probably see going forward are a few areas such as multicolor LEDs, eliminating the need to have 3 or 4 different colors of LEDs in a given display to give you the full color spectrum. Can you do that with a single discrete unit, an array of those discrete units? Can you bring down the cost of OLED manufacturers so you can use it for a greater variety of applications? Those sheets of material are quite useful for larger displays, but can you bring the cost down so they can be used in other applications? And the one thing when I looked at this that was really interesting was there's been some discoveries about running LEDs in reverse and it having an incredible cooling effect. So does that push out and is that used in large electronic systems to cool processors and servers and things like that, and would be a completely new application for LED technology? That's yet to be seen, but could be quite exciting.
Yeah. So now, excuse me, the next slide, William, is the slide where we start to always get questions, and we actually got a question even before we started the webinar and when we were in the green room about the quality of the patents and how can you determine quality. And what I'll just preface this is for everybody in the audience, we did a webinar for an entire hour talking about patent sites, quality, and how they come up with the numbers and the formula, and there's a lot of math, and there's I think it's a white paper. It's more than a white paper. It's a huge summary of how they do it. But in a nutshell, William, can you explain how patent site determines quality?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two things here. So this slide, we move from this date concept that we were looking to this reporting date, which we should touch on. But in the later slides, we as well look at this patent asset index and competitive impact. And I don't know if we have the slide in there, Gene, in like 2 or 3 more slides where we have the next one after this. It should be that we have these 2 core metrics, right? Exactly in the red bubble in the middle here. So the guy who started PatentSite, Niels Omland, did a lot of research at the university where he was working, looking at what factors are actually accurate for determining the value of a patent, and found this forward citation and geographical protection being the strongest indicators of the value of the patent. And we turn this into our metrics. Technology relevance is citation based with a number of corrections. Market coverage is geography based with a benchmark against the GNI of the countries that it's covered. And we use both of these to calculate the competitive impact, our value score. And the reason we multiply these 2 together is you need to have a strong technology, you need to have a really innovative patent, but you also need to protect that in some jurisdictions, right? I mean, if you lose protection in all jurisdictions, not only does the patent not have a value, I would even call it a cost, because you've given away your technology without getting anything in return, right?
Right, and you have to maintain it too, so it does have a real cost.
And yeah, an actual cost, not just a hypothetical cost, but
right.
you've paid to file that thing as well.
right.
So yeah. So
and the European Commission relies on your data, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So for the Dow DuPont acquisition, and for the merger and the acquisition of Monsanto by Bayer, they looked at the patent asset index, they looked at the patent landscape to determine the impact that those M&As would have on the innovation landscape. And in order to determine the impact, they use the patent asset index metrics in order to determine that. So it's not just scientifically proven, it's proven by regulators and a lot of industry players as well.
Yeah, so if that is important to anybody, we can get that information to you after the webinar. So but I jumped ahead a couple slides.
We go back a couple slides, yeah.
So first we lead into with the quantity distribution, and then the next slide gets us into, okay, now it's not just about quantity, we got to factor in quality as well, because once upon a time it was only quantity. It was almost like thermonuclear war. It was, I've got more warheads than you. But we're in a different age right now in the patent world.
Yeah. So I mean here what we were looking at in the last bar graph is the priority date. So basically when things were filed, and we just see them once there. Here we look at reporting date. So we look at what is the active portfolio, what is the portfolio companies have chosen to maintain, and already we see a massive reduction in China. One part of that is because, of course, all these previous filings in Japan, particularly the valuable ones, they've chosen to maintain those. And also, I think, the filings in China, not all of those are maintained. I mean, Gene, we did this webinar about the annuity fees, and we saw in there that, if all the Chinese patents were maintained, the Chinese Patent Office over the lifetime of them would be making more than double the USPTO does. I cannot believe people are going to pay those annuity fees for those.
Right.
So I'm sure a lot of the patents that we were looking at in the last slide have even already been discontinued. So that's one big factor, but still a sizable, nearly 50% chunk here is China, and we can see the reduction from Japan. And I would, and this was the hypothesis me and Dirk had to start with, would be that these are probably the old patents, right? These are there are obviously some new filings in there, but those companies, they're maintaining those key assets. You know, if you've got the patent for the white LED, you're not going to just discontinue it after 10 years. You're going to have it for as long as humanly possible, because there is a lot of value in that, and so the age of these portfolios is likely growing as well, right?
Right. So let's get to the next slide. This slide is the sort of the money slide. This is where you see it all come together. This is where you have it's the function of the quality and the quantity, and
it speaks exactly to what Mike said, right? About the overstating China. I mean, they're way out there on the right, but really low down in the chart.
Right.
And the bubble size here, this is the patent asset index, the cumulative strength of the portfolios. And we can see, whilst the US is a much smaller portfolio, they actually have a larger patent asset index. The bubble size here is larger than for China, even though the Chinese portfolio is multiple times that of the US. And we can see there the Netherlands, which Dirk was pointing out as well, is, whilst very, very small in terms of filings, in terms of number of patents, massively high quality, right? If someone's looking to acquire a startup country, the Netherlands are, because we normally have this conversation about looking for startups, and they're in that top left-hand corner. So,
well, you know, and what was the company that we did when we did the antiviral webinar? And it showed that there was this small company that had this extremely crazy high quality portfolio, and the name is escaping me. And
it's been too many sleeps since then. Me too.
No, I know, but
I'm sorry.
You know, no, I know, and I had it at the tip of my tongue and I lost it. And the reason I bring that one up was, you know, I thought to myself, you know, I should just invest in that company, you know, and then I didn't, and I'm like, you know, I didn't have the conviction of my convictions, I guess, you know, and so, and then all of a sudden that company they busted out, because then they started getting media and press, and it's like, oh, they've got this great technology, and I don't know where they're at right now, but their stock did go crazy for a while. So I don't know whether people are using your tool for that reason, but you know, I just throw that in there. And that's probably also why, you know, I was shocked when we saw the numbers, and we look, let me just push this slide here. You go back to the Netherlands, 1%, really? And then you get to this slide and it's like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Now I see, right?
And they filter to the top, right? So when we do this analysis, when we do this benchmark by patent asset index rather than by just number of patents, they come much further up the listing directly. So
right,
we can have that cream come to the top, and we can identify what that is.
And that's why when they're so top of mind when you think of this technology, and if you just look at the numbers, they wouldn't be. They wouldn't be. So, all right. Let's see. We're about halfway through, so let me push this next slide, and so we can get to the lithium-ion batteries, and then we can. Go
So, I mean, this was our kind of hypothesis here, and it's about the aging portfolio that we have in here as well. And these countries that initiated the technology, basically, their portfolio is getting much older. And you can also see here, I mean, we didn't show the data further back, but you can even see the kind of old original innovation patents here. So the Japanese portfolio back in the early 2000s, and then this decrease to the 2010, you can see those older patents becoming inactive because they were just invented so long ago. And then seeing the more recent increase in age as the countries, you know, hold on to their strong assets that are becoming older and let go of their you know, small improvement assets that are no longer worth holding, because they're more interested in maybe licensing revenue or such rather than building out the technology, which China is doing with this maintenance of a constant 3-year-old portfolio. Which is just a massive sign of not maintaining assets and just filing loads of new ones all the time.
Right.
There's an interesting trend here, though, which is the with a lot of those companies consolidating over time into a similar age of portfolio? And does that indicate that larger, more sophisticated companies that are maintaining huge numbers of assets have models that indicate what patents to maintain over time, what are the replenishment rates that they need, and does that dictate that those companies are going to settle into similar levels when you aggregate large numbers of assets?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I think some people do work around that strategy, right, of saying, okay, what is the right age of a portfolio to maintain? And I think that's very technology specific, but I could imagine that there is a good age depending on the technology that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, I agree very much. The age would vary by technology, but when you look at it in the massive numbers like this, I think in a given technology, seeing it consolidate would make sense.
You know, and that's interesting because one of the things that I'm told by some of the people who I know that are chief IP counsel or chief patent counsel, you know, that level of person, they have their own little clique, so to speak, and because there's only so many of those people around, you know, and so when they have problems or issues, you know, they can't just walk down the hall and say, hey, what do we do in this situation, you know, because they're the decision maker. So they have their own little group, and you know, they bounce ideas off of people, and as you would probably expect them to do. But this would be a great tool. You look at this, and if you're seeing this, like your average age of portfolio here now is 7 to 9 years largely, or you know, maybe, you know, over the last 5 years it's been 6 to 9 years, say. And your portfolio age isn't in that target area, you might wonder, well, what am I doing? You know, am I leading the curve in a good way, or am I leading the pack in a really bad way?
I think as well the age, it does give a good indication of kind of the speed of innovation in the technology. I think there's a lot of people who've talked about the reason the Chinese are so keen on utility models, even though they don't last as long, is because the speed of innovation is so high that they want to get the protection as soon as possible, that they can utilize it basically, and that's one reason why they're so keen on those, because the speed of innovation there is so much higher, and
right.
and that could be part of what we see as well, right? As the speed of innovation is slowing down in the old countries for the technology, and China, it's keeping step.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so let's move on to lithium-ion batteries, and so this will mirror what we just did, and we'll start with this here. And Dirk, do you want to lead us off, since William led us off with last time?
Yes. So for me, lithium-ion batteries, as you know, they were introduced in 1991 or by Sony, and it was back then a very delicate technology, because I recall these news pictures of burning laptops. And if you think today, we had the problems with the Samsung Galaxy a couple of years ago, but nonetheless, we have now millions or billions of lithium-ion batteries everywhere around at our workplaces, at home, in our pockets with our phones, even in our cars. And electrical or cars or hybrid cars seems to be so almost if they've been around all the time, but it is, I think it was in 2011 or 2012 when the Chevy Volt was introduced. And this was a big story back then. So we came down a long, long way. If you think about LG Chemical from South Korea producing a large number of lithium-ion batteries now, also to the car industry, like the Chevy Volt back then, or Japan with Panasonic. I think it's an incredible story we have seen over the last 15 years here. But again, we see that China is leading here in total portfolio size with all the patents they had. And the third one is South Korea is just not even a third of the numbers from China. So the pattern seems here to look like very, very similar. And talking from Germany, it is also the question with all the car manufacturers in Germany. So there are 4,026. It's not a big number, and which raises a lot of questions to me.
Yeah. Anybody have any thoughts on this, or want to just push on to the, because the next slide, and I'm kind of looking at it ahead, is like extremely telling, I think.
I think we see it in the following ones as well, but I mean, I'm just surprised at the dominance of China and Japan here, particularly when, you know, Samsung SDI as well in South Korea. I would have expected a bigger share here, but again, I guess we probably see in the following analyses the answers to this.
So let me push this here and show. I mean, this one is just okay. So Japan was making the world's lithium-ion batteries, and then now nobody other than China is making them.
Right. And we see this. I was really interested. I mean, it's where me and Dirk are, but this little bump in Germany, and we kind of saw it in Taiwan in the LEDs. But there's this kind of we gave it a really good try, but no, we've just given up at this point, or just maintaining much fewer assets, right?
Yeah. Mike, what are your thoughts about this when you see this? I mean, it's just so stark as it winding down in Japan and winding up in China. I mean, very quickly.
Yeah, so if you look at the top 5 battery manufacturers by capacity, megawatt capacity, 2 of those are Chinese, being CATL and BYD. And obviously there's a large number of other players, and most of the international players also have manufacturing capacity in China. The interesting thing, though, is there seems to be a move. Well, there's one move that is definitely happening, which is the capacity volume is moving from what was traditionally a consumer electronics play, laptops, cell phones, to an automotive play. And in a few years, it's predicted that up to 90% of the lithium-ion battery capacity will be targeted to electric vehicles, whether those be commercial vehicles or buses or trains and things like that. So that volume change is going to dictate where the capacity is built. So where in the last decade most of those factories have been built in China, it seems like they've moved from only 3 new factories being predicted 5 years ago. Now they're predicting up to 70 to 90 new factories, and those factories are being moved around geographically and are matching the major automotive centers. So China will remain, but there are a growing number of factories actually proposed for Germany. So it may be in 5 to 10 years, this data will look quite differently, and Germany may have a more prominent space. Japan is continuing to have factories, Korea, and there's a number in the US, and some interesting innovation in the automotive space in respect to batteries out of the US. So there's a lot going on here, and changes in the last few years that probably the data doesn't quite show yet. That be in the next 5 to 10.
So, Mike, what do you think about the COVID factor? You know, there's been a lot of people that have wondered whether supply chains are going to change as the result of this disruption. And sitting here and listening to you talk about, well, there's already this movement towards maybe more lithium-ion factories, at least for auto in Germany and even in the US and elsewhere outside of China. And knowing that there's been some concern, and who knows, once we get past this COVID, people have very short-term memories sometimes.
Yes.
But do you suppose, I mean, what are you hearing? What do you think? Do you think that there might be more of a move to at least diversify?
Yeah, I think there's 2 factors driving that, COVID being one, and the tariff situation between the US and China being the other. But there would definitely be a move to diversify, and I think there's people planning for that. But I think there's also people making kind of plan Bs. So whether they end up pulling the trigger or setting up smaller operations with conditional setups to ramp that production if needed, that may be more likely. there are a lot of people laying the groundwork to do so. Whether they do so or not is to be seen.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. To be continued there. And because I'm fascinated by the supply chains, and you look at this picture here, and it's stark. I mean, everything, not everything, that's an exaggeration, but so much runs on a lithium-ion battery, and eventually we're going to have a breakthrough. But who knows when it's going to be a breakthrough with the next technology that's going to supplant the lithium-ion battery and give us longer batteries, and maybe it's going to be an advance on lithium-ion batteries, probably more so in the short-term future. But all of that battery technology, and maybe it's simply because I'm an electrical engineer, so that area really fascinates me. But you look at this, and during this COVID crisis, even though we're kind of coming out of it, and what's going on, and how China has really shut down, and when they clamp down on almost 1 billion people there for a while, and shut down the whole country, practically, or half the country. It's disturbing, how leveraged the world is on China.
There's a lot of risk there for sure.
There's a lot of risk, and it's not to say anything bad about China. It's just, business tends to not like risk. And looking at this, it seems that there's a lot of eggs in the Chinese basket, and for a lot of good reasons, right? It's, not to say that they were bad decisions. They were probably very good economic decisions at the time. But let's push forward, because that's a whole webinar in and of itself. But
I would like to add something here, something on the upside.
Sure.
So if we see these new production sites, and if we are looking more towards batteries for transportation, there's also a technology aspect, because we always think lithium-ion batteries are almost the same if it's my laptop, my cell phone, or my car, but there are important differences. And probably this is a chance for the countries falling behind in the last decade to regain grounds and to come up with innovative battery cells, batteries controlled, because I don't mind to charge my phone overnight, but if I'm on a family trip, I don't want to spend hours on recharging my electrical vehicle. So
Right.
I think there's a lot of technology to discover, and the opportunity to shine again on the global scale with IP from the old countries coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think, if you're a company or you're a country and you really want to get into something, you really want to focus, there's a whole lot of great areas that you can focus on, because there's unlike certain patent commissioners of the past who said everything worth inventing has already been invented, the the world is our oyster. It's whatever you can imagine, it seems, anymore can be invented and will eventually be invented. So this is the quantity distribution, before we get into the quality distribution. And let's just get to the bubble graph. This is one I really like. And this, I'll have to say, when I was looking at the percentages again, I was surprised to see the US was not higher, because I believe the lithium-ion battery was invented in the US at the University of Texas, through Bayh-Dole, or at least some very significant, if not invented there, extremely significant advances in that technology came from university technology. And then again, you see here, the US has got the highest quality portfolio. Now, William, we had a question earlier about the bubble size. That came in a little bit after we moved past that, so I saved it for this one. And it's, what is the meaning of the bubble size?
So I mean, the bubble size is the product of the axes. It's basically the sum of the competitive impact, the sum of the quality for all of the patents in the portfolio, and this is then the patent asset index, and this is then giving us a like Mike mentioned, a more corrected benchmark to say what should be considered to be the top, and that's the reason that we select these countries, because they have the highest patent asset index, but it's also the bubble size here, and you can have two very different positions on this chart, but the same bubble size. You can have a large portfolio with a low quality or a small portfolio with a high quality, and so you can then also learn something about the strategy, right? I mean, I always call back to this example with the telecommunication companies and the Etsy patents that we also did with Eugene.
Yep.
And you can see, you know, InterDigital, who's a pure, you know, licensing revenue player with this low portfolio size, really high quality, because they need to have every patent be commercializable. They need to be able to license it. Whereas you have Huawei, who's just building out technology, because they're supplying devices to the market and telecommunications equipment. And so it's a very different strategy. And I guess that's also kind of what we see here, right? With China building it out, and maybe US having some of those past key technologies that you mentioned in the fundamental developments.
Yeah, yeah, and then the trail of the bubbles, that's over time. And if we had some action in here, which sometimes we have had in the slides, what you can see is over time, you can trace these over time and see the bubbles get bigger or smaller and move up and down, left and right, depending upon the years. And the last one is today. So
exactly. And I think maybe something interesting to point out here is kind of, if you look at Germany and South Korea, and we don't have a slide on this, but if you look at Germany and South Korea, there's kind of this reciprocal development, as Germany reduces and South Korea increases. And we did a little bit of investigation, and a lot of this is coming from the joint venture. I think it was a joint venture, right, Dirk? With
yes, from 2008
Samsung
to 2012.
Samsung and SDI and Bosch, and the end of that, and the filings from Germany drying up a little bit, and just maintaining the old assets, which we can see in the age chart as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's well, Mike, before I move past this, do you have any thoughts on this?
Just in respect to your comment about the initial innovation being at the University of Texas, and you're right with that, but the first prototypes of commercial products came out of Japan shortly thereafter, and that's why they had the big jump in terms of commercial success and building this into something that was saleable, and the companies there really seized on that, and the volumes of patents likely support that.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's move to the next, because so now this next slide shows us just the average age, and the average age here is a bit less. It's 5 to 7 years,
and
really
particularly
6 to 7 years now.
Germany, you can see almost getting a year older every year, nearly, or half a year older every year, which really solidifies that in the last chart.
Again, we see that the Chinese patents are staying 3 years. So they're really just getting these for the useful manufacturing cycle.
Right.
And so we had a question here about how many patents issued to Chinese companies are worth anything. And that's a really complicated question, right? I mean, because value is in the eye of the beholder. And what we see here looking at both of these technologies is we see Chinese companies, they get patents and then they let them go, and then they get them and then they let them go. And there's a lot of them that are, that are not probably high quality, maybe even most of them. And then but when you get so many of these things in numbers, and you're manufacturing, and then the numbers form a certain amount of protection, and you're getting them so that you can really manufacture them. It's a different play than when you're the core innovator, right?
There's an interesting statistic in terms of grant rates for Chinese residents versus non-residents in China. The 26% grant rate for Chinese residents and 68% for non-residents. So that's a huge disparity and likely indicative of the quality issue there. versus in the US, that's 51 and 53, so pretty much identical in what you would likely want to see if something was really highly functioning.
Yeah, and the next slide that we have here is that quality versus quantity in China.
And there are a lot of the players that Mike, you pointed out here, or at least the two that you pointed out, right? BYD and Catel, I think, were the ones that you mentioned there.
Yes.
But you can see here the difference with the universities as well compared to the operating companies.
Yeah. Yeah. Foxconn. Yeah.
So the universities in China just kind of building out more filings. I think it's kind of, I mean, it would be kind of interesting to kind of do that just from a research perspective, I guess, as well, to look at, you know, the research centers in the US and the research centers in China and what are they putting out, and those in China seem to be putting out a lot of noise. There might be some quality innovations in there, but a lot of noise as well, whereas the other countries, it's much more discerning, I think. And it can introduce, and this kind of analysis, it can introduce some questions for us to ask. Like me and Dirk had the question, like, who is this, I'm going to say their name badly, but Baon Group, for example, that was not known to us, and we had to do a bit of research basically to find them. But here, in terms of people filing and producing quality patents in the space, they stick out quite quickly, which then piques our attention, going back to the invading the Netherlands comment from earlier, basically, right?
Right. All right, so now the next technology, what might be the next technology?
One last comment maybe before we move on there.
Sure.
If you create at the company level a similar chart to what you did at the country level and show how the quality is changing over time, if you see a jump or a trend in one direction for a given company, that can be very indicative of a change in how they're competing. Are they moving from competing on price and volume to looking at higher quality type products and really investing more in innovation?
Yeah. All right, so let's move on here because we're running low on time and we want to make sure we get to this. So this is thriving technology areas in China. William, information.
Yeah, maybe I should explain how we came to these, and I'll let Dirk and Mike argue about the details. But basically,
sure.
we looked at all the technology clusters that we have, so machine determined technology fields, and that's what you see here, the clusters that come out of that and their structure. And then we looked at from 19 to 20, from 19 to 20, yeah. What are the areas which have increased the most in China, and not just increased, but increased their share in China, so that these are the technologies which are becoming more and more quickly dominated by Chinese players or Chinese innovators. And so we see LEDs in there, electronics, semiconductors, light emitting. We see display technology before that, MRI, which has, of course, applications beyond the medical as well. Navigation, patent recognition. There are actually a lot of those kind of things that come up. I mean, the Chinese are obviously extremely active, but then other areas like organic chemistry, more computing. There were some drug elements that came up in there, including like gene expression and such that they're heavily working on. But yeah, maybe
agriculture we have seen as well.
Yeah.
So
go ahead, Dirk.
If I may just add, so what we really like to find, and we really did the LED part first, that the light emitting came up here as one of the biggest thriving or heavily thriving technologies. And this is some other components of lighting, but a major part is really related to LED. So we can see that it works. But what is interesting for me here is if you look at the first one, the liquid crystal displays. So we are talking now about China, and there are so many companies producing displays in volumes for prices that large companies had problems. I recall that a couple of years ago, Sony, when they were selling their LCD displays with a loss just to keep in the market. And now even the followers in Korea have problems to establish their next technology, OLEDs, in the market because consumers are price sensitive. And can they spend? They have just a budget to spend, and if they can get an cheap LCD display, why should you buy an expensive OLED? So even the followers who picked up technologies and scaled them are now under pressure from China, and they cannot even thrive with their newly built technologies. And this is really, really interesting. And also that we see other technology areas which are not at top of mind, like, for example, in the organic chemistry field with intermediate products of synthesis. I was surprised to find something like that. So
Yeah,
I think there are a couple of technologies to come.
You look at the next slide, and this kind of gives you an idea of where they were in 2014 versus where they were in 2019. And you see much more active in liquid crystal displays, much more active across the board, really. Mike, what are your thoughts about this?
The thing that jumps out to me is over half of those items are related to artificial intelligence. Right? Look at pattern recognition, machine translation, evaluation, tracking, even navigation application for artificial intelligence. That's obviously a huge area of emphasis. And I think if you look at the overall number, it's something like 3/4 of the patents filed in the world around AI are being filed in China. So that's a huge number. That technology will be very dominant. To see those numbers is
yeah,
almost in terms of the volume.
And then the next slide has puts percentages on, and I mean, this is, you know, look at tracking, look at pattern recognition, over half. Machine translation, 2/3. Testing, well, testing, of course, because you can't get any protection in the U.S. really, you know. So this is this is really interesting. This slide here, I think. William, thoughts on this?
I mean, when we were talking about this to start with, me and Dirk thought about which technologies might be relevant as well to the kind of trend we're talking about, because you need to have something at a level that is, you have this core innovation that then breeds many more developments, and this scaling is possible. And I think a lot of this is what we see here, right? So navigation, machine translation, even those electronic, those computer-based ones, the liquid crystal display, the applications for these technologies are massively widespread, and it's then the many numerous applications and subsequent then scaling of the technology that I think is driving this. And I think whilst there are a huge number of technologies that works with, not everything would come up there. So you wouldn't find cars on their own being a thing, because it's too far developed technology. It's accumulation of things. We talked about 5G as well, but the level of work that has to go into that and complexity that maybe makes it difficult to follow this process. So maybe there are technologies that are protected from this, but there are so many that are massively affected as well.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I see that we're at the end of our time here, and I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to wrap up. So maybe we can go in reverse order and start with you, Mike. What is the one thing that you would like people leaving today remembering?
That the high-level trends are incredibly interesting and great to talk to in an environment like this, but breaking into more company-specific or technology-specific subsections of this analysis is where the real useful information is. The company level information that we touched on here, getting into more granular technology breakdowns, that's where there's information that you can use to make business decisions, to guide your licensing programs, to guide your decisions about investments in technology and partnerships. And that's where the real meat is.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you joining us today. Dirk, your final thoughts.
What I would like the audience to take home is that history does not have to repeat itself. So we have seen with the LEDs that there was a core invention, scaling, and then the manufacturing. With the lithium-ion batteries, it looks almost like the scaling immediately was skipped towards China. But from our discussion, we heard that if let's say the countries which are falling behind, if they provide solution into new innovation areas, it's their opportunities to scale back and regain their grounds in the global IP space.
Okay, thank you very much, Dirk. And William, your final thoughts here today. What do you want people leaving remembering?
I think I'm going to reuse one of the ones that I used before with Eugene, but that's about that I think we used for the annuity fees. You know, making decisions based on knowledge and information, right? We can be in an industry and sit back and think, you know, the changes that are occurring out there aren't going to affect us. I remember having a very short conversation with a very high up person in an auto company in IP, saying that you know, this electric car nonsense is not going to affect us, and I think if we have that view, we're going to get taken over by China, get taken over by others. So I think having an oversight on this can allow us to see what's coming, to see what companies there are that are coming out of that, like Mike says, drilling into the details of this, and then make, you know, forward thinking decisions, you know, not just carrying on with the same and hoping for the best, but saying, okay, the environment is changing and we need to be ahead of that curve and be an innovator and be a leader rather than a reactor.
Yeah. All right. Well, great. Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate you joining us, and I appreciate everybody in the audience joining us for this hour in this conversation about IP and portfolios, and taking a look at these interesting technologies and what may be coming down the road in terms of technologies growing in particularly China, which is the place where most people think that the US and other countries have to keep your eye on for a variety of reasons. They obviously are investing very heavily in innovation and in their patent system, and encouraging their companies and inventors, individuals even, to use the patent system. And we probably all could learn a little thing or two from the Chinese on that regard, and encouraging our companies a little bit more as well. So that's my final thought, and I appreciate you joining us. We have another LexisNexis webinar scheduled for this week on Thursday. Hopefully you can join us. You can go to IP Watchdog and sign up. You'll those register for our newsletter will get an email here shortly with a link to register. And Patent Site has another upcoming webinar as well. So we look forward to having you join us again, and thank you, and have a good rest of your day.
Cheers, Gene.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.